In February 2014, Sony produced their first mirrorless camera in their new a6000 series range, which replaced the NEX cameras. At the time of its release, the a6000 had some incredible features, and Sony still sells this in their stores 6 years later. But is it worth getting in 2020? And if you have it, is it worth upgrading from? Let's discuss. Welcome back to my channel, guys. My name's Jason Morris and I do tips, tricks, tutorials on filmmaking, photography. I also make some live videos on minimalism as well. So if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you do that. That would be much appreciated. Okay, let's get into talking about the a6000 camera. Now, this camera has been a legend of a camera for 6 years now. And at the time of this release, the mirrorless cameras really weren't exactly as powerful as DSLRs. But the a6000 did show some promising results with an incredible EVF, fast video and photo autofocus, eye autofocus, and pretty decent low light performance in 2014. What I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna break this down into categories and show you how it matches up to cameras today. So let's start with the sensor. The Sony a6000 still has a strong 24 megapixel sensor that has a decent amount of dynamic range and isn't too bad under low light conditions as well. 24 megapixels is pretty much that sweet spot when it comes to cameras. And even if you are uploading to Instagram or Facebook, you only need about 12 megapixels anyway. Most of the time, it just starts getting compressed and you do lose a lot of image quality. So 24 megapixels is by far enough when it comes to beginner photographers. And Sony has been producing some pretty incredible sensors of late, and even a fair few years on from this sensor still is pretty decent. But I do notice the difference when using the a6000 compared to the a6400 with recovering the shadows and the highlights. But the a6000 definitely isn't as strong, but it still does a great job. Photography. Now, the a6000 has great image quality when paired with good glass. Now, you really need to invest in the glass. That is the most important part when it comes to getting a nice quality sharp image. And I guess it's still one of the top cameras when it comes to frame rates as well. It can capture up to 11 frames per second. Now, that's incredible with some APS-C cameras. Some DSLRs can only hit 4 to 6 sort of frames per second. And it really hasn't changed much with the mirrorless cameras. The standard at the moment is around that 11 frames per second, so it still makes this comparable to some of the cameras today. And another great feature that I guess not a lot of people know about this is the eye autofocus. It only has eye autofocus in that single shot though, but it's still good, but it's just not as good as what you can get in the a6400 and above. The newer cameras just have that better technology, and also the a6400 happens to have the processor that's out of the A9, so it tends to have a little bit more features than what the a6000 does. And I guess the great thing about having eye autofocus and an EVF is that DSLRs have just got an optical viewfinder, so they don't have eye autofocus. Some of them you pretty much have to go into live mode, which essentially flips up the mirror and turns it into a mirrorless camera anyway. Now, video. This thing is still capable of recording up to 1080 at 60 frames per second. Now, I know a lot of people still shoot 1080. 4K has been around for a few years now, but people still shoot 1080. For some, 1080 is plenty. And the image quality is still great. Like I said, the dynamic range isn't as good as some of the cameras these days, but paired with some of the quality lenses, you can get really good footage. And the most recommended lens from me would have to be the Sigma 16 1.4. But also having a lens with an OSS or optical steady shot is actually beneficial because the body doesn't have IBIS. So if you need nice steady footage, I would recommend get a lens with OSS, or you could just invest in a gimbal, because gimbals are pretty damn cheap at the moment anyway. I use the Feiyutech G6 Max, and this thing is so small, compact, and it's just a powerful little beast. But if you do want to check that out, the link will be up here or in the description below. Now, the only downside with the a6000, like I said, is 4K. A lot of cameras tend to have 4K now. and also 1080 at 120 frames per second. So it can't record that 4x slow motion. It can only record 2x slow motion. So it does fall a little bit behind here. But if you don't need 4K, then this camera will actually do just fine. Now this next one is probably the one that has the strongest weak point in my opinion. But for me, it never really was a weak point because I always recorded my audio externally. Although if you are thinking of using this camera as your main video camera and a vlogging camera and you want to chuck a shotgun mic on the top, unfortunately you can't because it doesn't have a 3.5mm audio input. So that is a downside to this camera in comparison to the cameras that have been released in 2019, and that will definitely be released in 2020. Pretty much every camera now has an audio input. But I mean, it's not exactly necessary. Like I said, I record using the Zoom H5 recorder with my shotgun mic close to me because I mean the camera is quite far away from me. If I had the, this is the onboard audio coming from the A7 III. You can see how bad this is. And a shotgun mic would only just make it a little bit clearer. But you need to get that audio as close to your face as possible. But like I said, you could still put this directly into the camera, but I just put it to an external audio because it does come out just that little bit clearer. Now, vlogging. Now, vlogging obviously has become a normal thing today. It's 2020 and there are vloggers everywhere. And vloggers, one thing that they do need is stable footage and great audio. So the shotgun mic is the problem with that. So that's, like I said, is a downside. And also vloggers tend to like a flip screen. So the A6100, the A6400, and the A6600 now have a flip screen. Now this is a game changer for people who want to see themselves while vlogging. Now obviously people don't just want to look at themselves. I mean, they want to compose their shot to make sure that they're in the correct frame. Now I've got an external monitor up the top here with my A7 III. I've got it mainly so I can actually see if I'm in frame, if I've drifted to the side. But for the case of this video, I'm center frame, don't want my head chopped off, so I don't want to pull a Tony Northrup and do this, because his recent video, he did this for his great, let's not get into that one. Anyway, but Canon, Panasonic and Nikon even have the full articulating screen. So the A6000 does fall behind a little bit here. But I mean, if you do have the Sony Alpha series in the full frame, they don't have flip screens with the full frame range. We've just got that little bit of a tilt up screen and half quarter tilt down screen. Sony. But anyway, when it comes to vlogging as well, it doesn't have IBIS. Now, I know a lot of cameras tend to have IBIS these days. Canon still hasn't caught up with the game. They don't have IBIS in their main cameras. What the hell is going on? So if you did compare this to some of the Canon cameras, well, it doesn't have IBIS. You just get a lens that has OSS. But, you know, IBIS does help reduce some of those micro jitters. And it is very noticeable when you have a camera that has IBIS, and then when you don't have IBIS, you can actually see all those micro jitters. It does work no matter what anyone says that Sony's IBIS isn't great. Man, if you turn that IBIS off, you'll notice it is really, really bad. Keep it on and you'll actually notice a big difference. But I guess at the end of the day, if you did want stupidly stable footage, like I said, grab a gimbal. Now, some other notable features in 2020. The A6000 does lack, obviously, a touchscreen, which most cameras in 2019 had pretty much started to produce as a standard. I mean, Nikon and Canon did much better than Sony when it comes to touchscreen, but the A6000 has none, so that's a downfall there. Now, battery power is probably one of the downfalls as well for the A6000. It was never good. It was never good throughout the A63, A65, and it started to get better with the A6400 and above. These small batteries are just pathetic. The new Z series batteries that are in the A7 III, and that's even in the A6600, is brilliant. Literally lasts all day, and you only need one. You obviously have another one as a backup. You never just have one battery. That's just playing with fire. With this, I've got 5 batteries, so you're just constantly rotating. That's the frustrating thing. But it still does, funnily enough, with photos, it still does compare with other cameras today. So it's rated to shoot up to about 360 shots. So that's still pretty decent for a camera of today. Now, weather sealing potentially is another con of this camera. Most cameras today have some form of weather sealing, but if you're not going to be in crazy conditions, then this shouldn't really faze you. I mean, I personally try not to be in any condition whatsoever that places my gear in any kind of bad weather at all. I try not to get any dust on it, try not to get any, like if it starts raining, I put it under my shirt. Even though I know it's weather sealed, I put it under my shirt. It's just up here, it's a lot of money you're investing in this and trusting the weather sealing. No thanks. So personally, not a downfall for me. But the A6000 on a plus side has got Wi-Fi, has got NFC connection. So if you did want to connect it to your smartphone, boom, that's great. It's pretty much the standard with most recent cameras of today. Now, one of the biggest pros of the A6000 would have to be the value. Now, there are 5 other Sony APS-C cameras out that have been released after this, and that has driven the price of the A6000 down like crazy. Especially if you buy this secondhand. Oh my God, for a beginner, you could pick this up secondhand at like Facebook Marketplace or something for about $400 with the kit lens. Some people sell it with a prime lens, $500, $550 secondhand. You cannot go wrong. If you are just starting out photography, this is probably the best thing you could invest in, because you could just get started into the camera system and then start investing in good glass. Once you purchase that body, upgrading the glass is the most important part. Until then, this camera still packs a punch in 2020 despite its minor drawbacks. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys, or decided whether to or whether not to get the A6000 in 2020. And for those who have it, just a bit of a justification that it's still a decent camera in 2020. For the price, this definitely cannot be beaten. It packs such a big punch against some of the newer models and potentially still will pack a big punch in the next year or two. All right, guys, my name's Jason Morris. It's 2020. It's time to create. Let's get it.